The protein brick tasted like cardboard soaked in salt water. Elias Vorn ate it anyway. He sat in the cargo hold of the last working human ship, back against a cold metal wall, boots stretched out in front of him. The lights in the hold were dim. Half of them were broken. Nobody had fixed them in weeks, because there was nobody left who had the time or the reason. He finished the last bite and folded the wrapper into a small square. He put it in his jacket pocket. Old habit. His mother used to hate litter. The ship hummed. Stars outside the porthole. Then the ship shook. A small, sharp shake, like something had grabbed it. Elias looked up. Through the porthole the stars disappeared one by one. Not because they moved, because something was covering them. 17 Dominion cruisers came out of nowhere, surrounding the human ship the way a hand closes around a fly. Each cruiser was bigger than any building left standing on Earth. Their hulls were dark and smooth, and the lights along their sides were a cold, deep blue that had no warmth in it at all. Elias looked at them for a moment. "Hell of a thing," he said. There was no one else in the cargo hold to hear it. He stood up, cracked his back, and went to find the ship's commander to tell her they had arrived. The commander's name was Yeva. She was 26 years old and had been promoted 3 times in the last year, because everyone above her kept dying. She stood at the bridge window with her hands locked behind her back, staring at the cruisers, and she did not look like a person who felt 26. She looked 100 years older than that. "They're not firing," she said. "They won't," Elias said. "Not yet. They want to see what they've got first. What they've got is a surrender delegation. They don't know that's all we are." Yeva turned and looked at him. She had the same eyes most people had these days, flat and tired and carrying something heavy behind them that they never talked about. "Elias, you don't have to do this. We've been through this. I know we have. Then let's not go through it again." She looked at him a little longer, then she turned back to the window. The docking signal came in. "Bay 7, they want you in an hour." "Plenty of time," he said. He went to get his jacket. The docking bay on the Dominion ship was the size of a city block. It was clean in a way that human places had stopped being. No scratches, no rust, no fingerprints on anything. The air smelled like nothing, not sterile, just empty of any smell at all, like the air itself had been processed until everything interesting had been removed from it. A translator drone met him at the end of the ramp. It was about the size of a basketball, floating at eye level. It communicated through sound, layered, shifting tones that the human translation chip in Elias's ear turned into words. "You are Sergeant Delegate Elias Vorn," it said, "representing the Human Coalition Remnant. That's me. You will follow." It moved. He followed. The drone led him through corridors that went on longer than corridors should. The ceiling was high. The walls had markings on them that his translation chip couldn't read. Old Dominion script, older than the language they currently spoke. Other species moved through the halls, all of them different, all of them giving Elias a wide amount of space. Some of them looked at him directly. Most looked away. He kept his hands in his pockets and walked. The drone stopped in front of a room, and the door opened. Inside, a chair, a table, a screen on one wall. The lighting was the same cold blue as the cruiser hulls outside. "You will wait," the drone said. Elias sat down. The door closed. He waited. After a few minutes, the tone started. It was low at first, barely there, coming from somewhere in the walls. It moved in slow waves. Each wave hit something at the back of Elias's skull, behind his eyes. It felt like standing at the edge of something very high and looking down. Like the moment before something terrible happens, when your body already knows, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. His hands, resting on the table, started to shake. He looked at them. "There she is," he said, the way a man greets an old dog. He put his hands in his pockets. The tone kept going. The feeling at the back of his skull kept pressing. He breathed, in through the nose, out slow. He had done this before. Not with sound waves from alien walls, but the feeling was the same. He had learned a long time ago that you could know something was dangerous and still stay in the room. The tone stopped. The drone floated back in through a slot in the wall. Subject displayed minimal fear response, it said, mostly to itself. It was talking to someone else through a channel Elias couldn't hear. Possible chemical suppression. Recommend scan. Scan away, Elias said. The drone turned toward him. A small light moved over him, head to toe. It paused. It did this twice more. No chemical suppression detected, the drone said. It sounded, if a floating ball with no face could sound anything, confused. Subject non-responsive to standard destabilization. Is there coffee? Elias said. A pause. What is? It's a hot drink. Humans use it in the mornings, or whenever, mostly whenever lately. There is no coffee. Elias sighed, the sigh of a man whose train is running late. What's next? What was next was the screen. The drone brought up the footage without introduction. No warning. Just the screen going bright. And then Elias was looking at orbital bombardment footage. Cities from above. Seen from space. At the moment the strikes hit. One after another. Chicago, Sao Paulo, Beijing, Mumbai. Each one a flash of white, and then smoke. And then nothing where there used to be buildings and streets and people going about their days. Then Columbus, Ohio. The drone was watching him, measuring. This was part of it. Show the human what was taken. Watch the human break. His jaw went tight. That was all. One small thing in his face, in the hinge of his jaw, for less than 2 seconds. Then it was gone. What time is my meeting with the Queen? He said. You will be brought before Veth Kara of the Dominion Ascendant in 40 minutes. He leaned back in the chair. I'll sit here until then. The drone did not leave right away. It stayed, which was not part of its protocol. It was, in its mechanical way, trying to understand what had just happened. It had shown this human the end of his world. It had shown him the glass crater where his city used to be. He had asked about a hot drink and checked the time. The drone filed an anomaly report and left. Elias sat alone in the room with the blue light. He thought about nothing for a while, the way a man thinks about nothing when the thing he could be thinking about is too large to fit inside a regular thought. Then the door opened, and 2 armed Dominion guards came to bring him to the throne room. He stood up, straightened his jacket. The jacket was old. It had a small tear at the left cuff that he had sewn back together twice. He smoothed it down anyway. He walked. The throne room doors were tall enough to fly a plane through. They opened, and the sound from inside rolled out like a wave. Thousands of voices, dozens of species, a court that had watched 214 civilizations end, and fully expected to watch one more. Elias walked in with his hands in his pockets, looking at the ceiling, the way a man looks at the ceiling of a place he has never been, but is not afraid of. He found a spot on the floor in front of the dais, and stopped. Looked up. The Queen looked down, and neither of them said anything yet. Veth Kara was not what Elias had expected. He was not sure what he had expected. Something monstrous, maybe. Something built to look like a nightmare. The Dominion had taken 214 species, and somewhere in his mind, he had pictured a creature made of all their worst fears. She was tall, 7 feet, maybe 8, standing at the top of the dais in robes that moved without wind. Her skin was deep gray, almost silver in the throne room light, and her eyes were entirely black. No whites, no irises, just black, like looking at the inside of something that went on forever. Her face was calm, not cold, not angry, just calm, the kind of calm that comes from someone who has not been surprised in a very long time. The court around her was arranged in rings, hundreds of beings, different shapes and sizes and colors, all of them watching. Some of them were species Elias recognized from the war, others he had never seen. All of them were quiet. This was ceremony. It had always gone the same way. It would go the same way now. The queen looked at Elias the way a person looks at a document they are about to sign. She raised one hand, and the tests began. The first test was fear. Elias felt it before he understood what was happening. A pressure behind his eyes, then a sound, low and layered, that seemed to come from the floor itself, and then the feeling, big and sudden, like a door blowing open inside his chest. The feeling that everything was wrong and always had been, and nothing could fix it, and the darkness was coming, and it was large, and there was nowhere to run. His hands shook. He looked at them. "There she is," he said quietly. The words were almost nothing, barely sound, but the drone near his shoulder caught them and translated. He put his hands in his pockets. His body was doing everything fear makes a body do. Heart faster, breath shorter, the edges of things going sharp. He let it happen. He breathed. He stood still. After a while, the feeling began to ease. The court was very quiet. One of the queen's advisors leaned close to her and whispered something. The queen did not respond. She was watching Elias with those black eyes, and there was something in her face now that had not been there before. Very small, but there. The drone filed its report. No chemical suppression, standard fear response detected in body. Response contained by subject through unknown means. Test result? Inconclusive. The second test was pain. The drone moved close to Elias's arm and pressed a flat device against it. He felt the first level and exhaled through his nose. The second level made his back teeth press together. The third level was the kind of pain that has a color, bright and white and total. He breathed through it, not gracefully. His face worked. His jaw muscles pulled tight, but he stayed standing. The queen watched the line on the monitoring screen, the line that showed where pain became breaking. For every species it was different, but it always came. The line always hit the ceiling, and the subject collapsed, or screamed, or begged, or all three. Elias's line climbed, 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 and hit the break point. A grimace, half a second. His eyes squeezed shut and then opened again. Then his face went still. He looked up at the queen. "You're curious," he said. It was not aggressive, not challenging. He said it the way a man says the weather looks like rain, an observation. The queen looked at him, said nothing, but she did not look away. The court shifted, very slightly. The way a room shifts when something unexpected happens, but nobody wants to be the first to say so. The third test was the offer. An advisor came forward with a screen showing maps, what was left of human settlements, scattered, small, surviving. The offer was simple. Collaborate with the Dominion, and those settlements would be protected. Elias would be given a title, authority, resources. He would be a governor of his own people, under Dominion rule. It was a good offer. It had worked before, not always, but often enough that it was still worth making. Elias looked at the maps for a long time. "How many people are left?" he said. The advisor gave the number. Elias was quiet. He looked at the number on the screen, the way a man looks at the last few dollars in his wallet, when he knows it's all that's there. "Pass," he said. The advisor blinked. This word was in the translation system. A refusal. Informal register. It had never been the response to this offer. "You decline the terms," the advisor said, making sure. "That's what pass means, yeah?" The advisor looked at the queen. The queen made a small gesture. The screen went dark. Test 3, logged and filed. The fourth test was history. They showed him everything. Not just human history, Dominion history. A full display of all 214 species, arranged in order. What they had been before contact. What they had become after absorption. The archive was thorough and precise, and it took a long time. Elias watched all of it without looking away. When the screen went dark, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what's interesting?" The Queen spoke for the first time. Her voice was low and even, like something read from a document. "Tell me." None of them looked surprised, Elias said. In all of that footage, all 214, every single one of them, when it was happening, looked like they expected it. Like somewhere in the back of their heads, they always knew this was coming, and they had already made peace with it. The throne room was very quiet. "Humans are surprised every time something bad happens," Elias said. "Every single time. It could be the exact same bad thing that happened to the last 5 civilizations, and we still act like we never saw it coming. We walk straight into the wall, every time." He paused. "I'm not sure if that's stupid or something else." The court did not know what to do with this. It sounded like a confession of weakness. It sounded like an idiot admitting he had learned nothing. But the man's face didn't look ashamed. He looked like he was working something out. The very small thing in her face from earlier was still there. The 5th test was death, or the simulation of it. The drone descended from the ceiling, carrying a blade, ceremonial in design, functional in purpose. Standard closure of the testing sequence. Every species, without exception, had broken by now. This was the moment for any final capitulation, any last offer, any plea. The blade came down toward Elias's throat and stopped 1 centimeter away. At the same moment, the room filled with a sound that had no name in human language. A frequency that hit the nervous system at a level below thought and told every living cell in the body that it was about to stop. Elias's heart rate, displayed on the monitor for the court to see, spiked. Then it leveled. Then, for the first time in the history of the test, it dropped below resting rate. The monitor made a sound. The advisor checked the reading. Checked it again. Elias stood with a blade at his throat, and his heart beat slower than it had when he was sitting in the waiting room. "Ain't the worst Tuesday I've had," he said. Nobody laughed. Nobody was supposed to laugh. It wasn't funny. Except the young alien attendant near the left wall, who made a sound that was the Dominion equivalent of a startled exhale, and then quickly looked at the floor. The Queen raised one hand. The blade withdrew. The sound stopped. The tests were over. The throne room sat in silence. She looked at Elias Vorn for a long time. He looked back at her with the same expression he had walked in with. Present, unhurried, carrying something behind his eyes that she could not read. "What are you?" she asked. Not as a queen addresses a subject. Not as a general considers an enemy. She actually wanted to know. Elias considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. "Still working that out myself," he said. "Been that way for a while." The Queen went back to her throne room and did not speak for 20 minutes. Her advisors stood at a careful distance and waited. This was not unusual after a testing session. Processing time was normal. What was not normal was the quality of her silence. Her silences were usually productive things. You could feel her thinking through them, organizing, deciding. This silence was different. This silence had a question in it. She called her head archivist and told it to pull everything on the humans. Not battlefield data, not military structure, not political records. Everything. Culture, art, language, history, religion. What they ate, what they built, what they sang. The archivist went to work. It was very good at its job. The data came back in hours. The Queen sat alone and read it. The war data came first. This was expected, and it was large. Humans had been fighting, other humans mostly, for most of their history. The records went back thousands of years, and they were full of conflicts. Borders moved, cities burned, empires rose and collapsed, and left behind rubble that other people built new cities on top of. The archivist flagged this section with a green marker, consistent with pre-contact assessment. Species demonstrates high aggression frequency, categorizable. The Queen read further. Then the archivist flagged something. A small flag at first, yellow, meaning anomaly, low priority. She pulled it up. The flag was about the cultural data. Specifically, it was about the relationship between the cultural data and the war data. In every other species the Dominion had ever studied, when conflict went up, cultural output went down. This made sense. When a civilization is trying to survive, it stops making art and starts making weapons. The two lines on any graph moved in opposite directions. It was one of the most reliable patterns in all of Dominion science. The humans' lines moved in the same direction. The worse things got, the more they made. The archivist had run the numbers 3 times and gotten the same result each time. During their largest wars, the ones that killed the most people and destroyed the most cities, human cultural output did not decrease. It accelerated. More music, more writing, more painting, more building, more stories, more songs. The archivist submitted a corruption flag on this section and recommended rerunning the data collection. The Queen overrode the flag. She opened the cultural files herself. She started with the music, because there was a lot of it, and she wanted to understand the shape of it first. She found something strange almost immediately. There was a form of human music that had come from a period of history, where an entire group of humans had been taken from their land, transported to another continent, and forced into brutal labor for generations. Their families had been separated, their languages had been taken, their names had been replaced. They had been treated as property. Out of this, they had made music. Not just any music. Music that the Dominion's cultural analysis systems rated in the top 2% of all recorded species output, across all categories: complexity, emotional range, structural innovation, lasting influence, all top scores. The Queen stared at this rating for a while. Then she kept reading. She found a man named Ludwig van Beethoven who had spent his life writing music and then slowly lost the ability to hear. By the end of his life, he was completely deaf. He could not hear a single note. He kept writing music anyway, some of the most complex, layered compositions the humans had ever produced, constructed in a silence he could not break, building sounds he would never experience, for an audience he would never hear them properly. The archivist flagged this entry too. Behavioral pattern inconsistent with evolutionary optimization. Subject continued high-cost activity with 0 immediate return. Possible data entry error. The Queen dismissed the flag. She was beginning to understand that the flags were the most interesting parts. Humans in their wars, the ones that happened before the Dominion arrived, had a habit that her archivist could not explain. In the middle of fighting, during the worst of it, they wrote. Not reports, not plans, letters. Long ones, short ones, scratched on any paper they could find. Letters to people they loved. Letters to people they would probably never reach again. She pulled one from a conflict that happened about 100 years before Dominion contact. A human soldier, male, young, writing from a place where fighting had been happening continuously for years. His city had been bombed. Many of the people he knew were dead. He was almost certainly going to die within the next few weeks, which he knew, and which he mentioned in the letter without any particular drama. The rest of the letter was about the way the person he was writing to laughed. He described the laugh in careful detail, the sound of it, the way her face changed. The exact expression right before it happened. He wrote about it for 2 full pages. The Queen read those 2 pages slowly. Her archivist submitted another flag. Emotional outputs are inverted relative to stimulus inputs. During extreme negative conditions, subject focused on positive sensory memory with high specificity. Species may be experiencing systemic psychological malfunction. She did not dismiss this flag. She just sat with it for a while. Open on the screen beside the letter. A man surrounded by death, writing about a laugh. She had absorbed 214 species. She had read their final documents, their last transmissions, their records of ending. All of them, in their final communications, had written about the things that were being lost. What they had. Grief and fear and anger. This man wrote about a laugh. She went to the religion files last, because they were the largest and she had been saving them. What she found there was the one thing that genuinely stopped her. Every species the Dominion had catalogued with religion had constructed the same basic architecture. Gods who were powerful, gods who were distant, gods who commanded and demanded and rewarded and punished, gods who were in essence versions of what every civilization aspired to be, strong, unchallengeable, permanent. The humans had built that too, but they had also built something else. They had built a god who suffered. One of their most widely held belief systems, still active at the time of Dominion contact, with billions of followers, was centered on a god who came to Earth, lived as a human, experienced pain and loss and exhaustion and hunger, was publicly executed in a humiliating and painful way, and then, in most versions of the story, came back. The theology was complex, and she did not pretend to understand all of it, but the shape of it was clear. A species that had created gods of power had also, at the same time, created a god of suffering, and they had argued about this god for 2,000 years. Wars had been fought over the details. People had died for specific interpretations of specific lines in specific documents. They had built enormous buildings in honor of this god, and made art about him, and sung to him at funerals and weddings and moments of crisis, and called out to him at 3 a.m. when they were alone and had no one else and nothing else left. The archivist submitted what it described as a critical corruption flag, recommending a complete data review. The Queen closed the flag. Then she closed all the screens. She sat in her chair for a while. Then she stood up. She did not call for an escort. She did not tell her advisors where she was going. She walked alone through the corridors of her ship, past the ranked guards who straightened as she passed, down the long hall to the cell block where the human was being held. She stood outside the transparent wall. Inside, Elias was sitting on the floor. His jacket was folded next to him. His back was against the wall. He wasn't sleeping, wasn't pacing. He was doing something with one finger against the cell wall, tracing something in the thin layer of condensation that had built up on the surface. It took her translation system 4 seconds to identify what he was drawing. It was the outline of a city, not a blueprint, not a map, just the shape of it. The tops of buildings against an imaginary sky, the way you see a city from a distance and recognize it before you can read any signs. The shape of a city that no longer existed. He hadn't looked up yet. He didn't know she was there. She stood outside the wall and watched his finger move. The lines appeared and faded as the condensation shifted. He was drawing something that would disappear, in a place he had not chosen to be, of a thing he had already lost. He kept drawing anyway. She stood there, and for the first time in 10,000 years, she felt like the one being studied. The queen of 214 civilizations, standing in a corridor outside a glass cell, watching a prisoner draw a dead city in water vapor. She had no file for this. She had no file for any of it. And she stood there much longer than she had intended to. She came back the next morning. No court, no advisors, no drones floating at her shoulder with clipboards and data screens. Just the queen, walking alone down the cell block corridor the same way she had walked the night before. And standing outside the transparent wall, the the same way. Except this time, Elias was already awake and already looking at her when she arrived. He was sitting with his back against the far wall, legs crossed, jacket back on. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, present, unhurried, like a man waiting for a bus that might or might not show up. She stood outside the wall for a moment. Then she pressed a control panel beside the door, and the wall went transparent on both sides. It had always been transparent from outside, but now the inside lighting changed, and they could see each other clearly. "You knew you were coming here to die," she said. It was not an accusation. It was the beginning of a line of thinking she had been following since last night, and this was simply where it started. "Seemed likely, yeah," Elias said. "And you came anyway." "Someone had to." "Why you?" He was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was thinking about how to say it simply. Everyone else had something to go back to. She looked at him. "You had nothing." "I had nothing they needed back," he said. There was a difference in those two things, and he knew she would hear it. She was quiet. In Dominion thinking, a creature with nothing to lose was a weapon. A simple weapon. Volatile, single use, pointed at a target and released. She had used such weapons. She had faced such weapons. She knew the shape of them. "Then you are a weapon," she said. "I understand weapons." "No, ma'am." She waited. "A weapon doesn't care what it hits," Elias said. "I just already paid for caring." He said this without bitterness, without self-pity. The way a man states a fact about himself that he has had a long time to make his peace with. She looked at his face for the lie in it, the performance, the angle. Every delegate she had ever spoken to had an angle. She could not find one. She began to ask him questions. Real ones, not tests. The questions she had not known she had until she spent a night reading the archive. She asked about the music, about why a people who are suffering would make beautiful things out of the suffering instead of simply trying to stop suffering. Elias thought about this. "Because the suffering doesn't stop just because you stop looking at it," he said. "But if you make something out of it, then at least it meant something. At least it wasn't just pain for nothing. The result is the same. The pain occurred. But the story is different. You value story over outcome." He shook his head slowly. "We value story as outcome. They're the same thing, for us." She considered this for a long time. She asked about the soldier and the letter, the man writing about a laugh while a city burned. Elias was quiet for a while. "You found that," he said. It wasn't a question. "It was in the archive." He nodded, looked at the floor. "When you're in a bad enough place," he said, "the stuff that matters most is the small stuff. The big things, the war, the city, whether you're going to survive, those things are too big to think about directly. They'll break you if you look straight at them. So you think about a laugh. You think about the way somebody's face looked, small and true and yours, something that nobody can take away, even if they take everything else. I don't know if that makes sense." "It does not follow logical priority," she said. "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." He looked up at her. His eyes were steady. "But it works." She was in the middle of asking her next question when the sound happened. It came from down the corridor. A crash, and then a high, thin sound, and then something rolling and clattering across the floor. A young Dominion attendant, small, low-ranking, barely past the juvenile stage, assigned to maintenance of this level, had been carrying a tray of components past the cell block. The tray had slipped. Components scattered across the floor, and the liquid in the center container spilled out hot, and the attendant caught some of it on its hands and lower limbs. It made a sound, a short, involuntary sound, not loud. The kind of sound that a creature makes when it is hurt before it has time to decide not to make a sound. Elias was on his feet before the sound finished. He crossed the cell in 3 steps, and pressed both hands flat against the transparent wall. His voice changed, not louder, but different, the way a voice changes when the person speaking has forgotten about everything except the thing directly in front of them. "Hey," he said. "Hey, look at me." The attendant on the floor looked up. It was shaking slightly, trying to gather the spilled components with one hand, while the other hand held the burned limbs close to its body. It looked at the human. A human, a prisoner, a member of the species that had been fighting the Dominion for 6 years, that had killed Dominion soldiers and destroyed Dominion equipment, and refused every offer and declined every term. The species that was supposed to be archived and filed and finished. Talking to it. Using the voice that people use for something that matters. "You're all right," Elias said. "You're all right. That burn, keep the burned part away from the floor. Don't let it touch the surface. Is there a medical kit on this level?" The attendant blinked, pointed down the corridor. "Okay, go get it. Before you do anything else, go get it and put the cooling pack on those burns. That's the first thing. Everything else can wait." He kept his hands on the glass. "Can you stand?" The attendant stood, unsteady but standing. "Good. Go." It went. Elias stood at the wall and watched it go until it turned the corner. His hands were still flat against the glass. Then he let them drop and stepped back. He turned and looked at the Queen. She was standing at the end of the corridor. She had not moved during any of it. She had not called for anyone. She had not intervened. She had stood and watched. Elias looked at her face, and something in his own face shifted. Not embarrassment, not apology. Just the look of a man who has been seen doing something private. "Kid was hurt," he said. "It is a Dominion attendant." "Kid was hurt," he said again. The Queen said nothing. Elias walked back to the middle of the cell, sat down, and picked up a piece of gravel from the floor, a small chip that had broken off from the cell wall at some point. He turned it over in his fingers, looked at it. She stood outside the wall and looked at him. She had spent the night with an archive full of soldiers and music and letters and gods who suffered, and she had filed all of it as data to be understood. She had told herself she was getting closer to understanding. She had believed this. Then a maintenance child had dropped a tray, and the prisoner of war from the species she was deciding the fate of had pressed his hands against a glass wall to call after it, and she realized she had not been close to understanding at all. She activated her comm quietly, without looking away from Elias. "Cross-reference," she said. "Is there any record in the full Dominion archive of a conquered species that both mourned their own dead and extended care to the conqueror's young, without any markers of calculation or strategy?" Her archive is searched. It took 11 seconds. 11 seconds was a long time for Dominion processing systems. "No, my Queen." All known contacted species in recorded history. 14 seconds this time. "No, my Queen." She closed the comm. Elias was still turning the small piece of gravel over in his fingers, looking at it with the focused attention of a man who isn't thinking about the gravel at all. She watched him for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked back down the corridor, past the spot where the tray had fallen, stepping over a component that the attendant had not yet come back to collect. She did not hurry. She was thinking about a man who had already decided he would die here, choosing to comfort a child of the Empire that had killed his city, holding both of those things at the same time, without appearing to think there was anything unusual about it. She had no word for this. In 10,000 years, in the language of the most advanced civilization in known space, she had no word for what she had just seen. The throne room was ready. It was always ready. The Dominion had been doing this for 10,000 years, and every part of the process was exact. The arrangement of the court, the lighting of the dais, the formal positioning of the advisors along the left wall, The herald at the door, the archivist at the recording station, the blade drone folded and dormant in its ceiling mount, no longer needed because the tests were done. The court was assembled. 2,000 beings seated in their ranks, waiting. This was the moment that came after every testing session. The ruling. The queen would stand at the dais and deliver her assessment of the contacted species and their disposition, and the machinery of the Dominion would begin moving in that direction. And within a generation or two, the species would be absorbed or subjugated or erased, and the archive would grow by one more entry. The queen walked in. The court rose. She took her position at the dais, looked out at the assembled court. Everything was in its place. Everything was as it had always been. She said nothing. 10 seconds passed. 20. The High Archivist, standing at his station, checked his instruments. The recording systems were active. The Queen was physically present. He looked up and she was looking at the data screen to her left, where Elias Vorn's file was displayed. His biometrics, his military record, his age, his city of origin, a city flagged in the system with a small symbol that meant location no longer exists. The photograph the intake drone had taken when he first boarded showed a man looking at the camera without expression. Not hostile, not scared, just present. 30 seconds. The High Archivist had served for 300 years. He had never seen this. There was a protocol for unresponsive sessions. It had been written 400 years ago, in case of a medical event during a ruling, and it had never been used. He took a small step toward the dais. "My queen," he said carefully, "the ruling awaits." "I know what awaits," she said. She did not look at him. She kept looking at the file. The court sat very still. Nobody looked at anyone else. She pulled up the archive data on the screen. Not Elias's file, the cultural files, the music, a letter. The deaf composer, building cathedrals of sound that he could not hear, constructing them note by note in the silence of a mind that remembered what sound was and refused to stop. She closed it. She pulled up the attendance care log from the day before. It was a routine document, a record of a minor injury and subsequent treatment. But the log had a note attached, because the monitoring system in that corridor recorded anything unusual, and the system had flagged the incident as unusual. The note was a video clip, 20 seconds long. The human at the glass wall, both hands pressed flat. His voice, and the attendant looking up. She closed it. She pulled up the bombardment footage of Columbus, Ohio. Not for strategy, not for data. She had looked at this footage 50 times in the last 2 days, and she was still looking for what she had missed. The flash of white, the smoke, the crater. And then from the archive she had already read, the image of Elias Vorn drawing the outline of that city in condensation on a cell wall. Not the crater, the city, the way it had been, the shape of it against a sky that no longer held it. She closed everything. The court waited. "Bring him," she said. The herald moved immediately. The court, which had been very still, shifted with a low sound, the sound of 2,000 beings adjusting in their seats at the same moment, because the same unexpected thing had just registered for all of them simultaneously. The queen walked down from the dais and stood on the floor of the throne room. Not on the raised platform, the floor, the same level as everyone else. This was not a position she had taken in any session anyone in that court could remember. She waited. The doors at the far end opened. Elias walked in between 2 guards who walked close without touching him. He was wearing the same jacket, the one with the repaired cuff. He looked at the room the way he always looked at rooms, taking in the size of it, the shape, the people, without appearing to be impressed or afraid of any of it. He stopped in front of her, the same spot he had stood in when the tests began. They were 6 feet apart. He looked at her face, and she looked at his. "Hell of a thing," he said, looking once at the ceiling, then back at her. She said, "I have spent 10,000 years believing that every species, studied long enough, becomes understandable." She was not reading from anything. These were not formal words. Every species has a foundation, the thing underneath everything else. The core drive, survival, expansion, fear, worship, pleasure. You find it and you understand the species. All behavior maps back to it. Elias listened. "I have studied your species for 2 days," she said. "I have spoken with you. I have watched you." A pause. "I cannot find your foundation." Elias was quiet for a moment. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you grieve your dead and comfort the children of the people who killed them. I mean that you make beautiful things out of the worst pain you have. I mean that a man who is about to die writes 2 pages about a laugh. I mean that your gods suffer. I mean—" She stopped. She stopped because she was aware that the court was listening, and she had not intended to say this much. The words had come out the way things come out when you have been holding them too long. Elias was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. Recognition, maybe. The look of a man who has heard something true. "I mean," she finished more quietly, "that you are the first species I cannot file." Elias said, "That good or bad for us?" She was silent for a long time. "I do not know," she said. The throne room, 2,000 beings, absolute silence. Because the Queen of the Dominion Ascendant did not say, "I do not know." Not in session, not on the record. The Dominion was built on the premise of knowing, categorizing, understanding, absorbing, archiving. Every species was a question with an answer. The answer always came. She had just said, out loud, in front of her entire court, that the answer had not come. Elias looked at her steadily. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to understand what you are," she said. "We don't fully understand it ourselves," he said. "Kind of the whole problem." He paused. "Kind of the whole point, maybe." She offered him a ceasefire, not a surrender, not a treaty with terms that favored the Dominion. A ceasefire, genuine, with the specific condition that the Dominion would withdraw from human-occupied space, while she, herself, not an archivist, not a drone, read more, learned more, came to her own assessment on her own time. Elias was quiet for a long time when she said this. The court was quiet too, in a different way, the way a room is quiet when the thing happening in it has never happened before and everyone is aware of it, and nobody wants to speak in case it breaks. "You're not offering this because you're afraid of us," he said. "No. You're offering it because you don't know what we are yet." "Yes." He thought about it. He thought about Yeva on the bridge, with her hands behind her back, looking at cruisers. He thought about the people in the remaining settlements. The ones the maps had shown, scattered and small, still there, still somehow there. He thought about what the number added up to when you put it next to what the number used to be. "All right," he said. No grand speech, no conditions. Just the word, flat and simple, the way he said everything. They let him out a different way than they had let him in, through a side corridor, back toward the docking bay, back toward the ship. He walked with his hands in his pockets and his eyes forward. In the throne room, the court sat in silence. The High Archivist waited for the Queen to return to the dais, to resume the session, to give the court something to file, a next step, a directive, a shape to the future that they could organize themselves around. She stood on the floor of the throne room and did not move. She was thinking about the soldier in the trench and his 2 pages about a laugh. She was thinking about the hands pressed flat against glass. She was thinking about a skyline drawn in water that was already fading. She was thinking about a species that had been broken in almost every way a species can be broken, and that had, in the midst of the breaking, written music and built gods and sent letters about small true things that nobody could take away. She was thinking about how none of this made sense on any chart, and how it was the only thing she had ever encountered that she wanted to understand, not because understanding it would be useful, but simply because it was there. The court waited. The herald, uncertain, looked at the archivist. The archivist looked at the floor. The queen stood in silence, the kind of silence that does not have an end time. The kind of silence that is in itself an answer, even if no one in the room yet knew what the question had been.